Greetings, sports fans, and welcome to the inaugural podcast of Matters of Inclusion. I'm Shamie Kramer, co-host and co-founder of Diversity in Sport Day.
And I'm Tracy Rivas, co-host and also co-founder of Diversity in Sport Day.
Today's podcast will feature U.S. Paralympian Candace Cable, the first woman to medal in both the Winter and Summer Paralympic Games, and include a discussion on ableism. What is it and how do we address and eliminate it?
But first, we want to give a little background on Diversity in Sport Day and what drew each of us to this project. So honestly, for me, I can't remember a time when I wasn't writing about sports or interested in sports. As soon as I went to college, I started working for the newspapers and radio stations. And my goal was to get a job with Sports Illustrated magazine, which eventually I did. And that was the launch of my sports journalism career. And it has been quite a ride. I've worked for sports leagues, teams, the U.S. Olympic Committee, the U.S. Paralympic Committee, and many other sports organizations. And I can tell you, as an African-American woman in sports, it has been a bumpy road. I have not always seen someone like me doing the work I wanted to do, and I want to make sure I'm that person for anyone hoping to work in this industry.
And I grew up in a family with 3 generations of professional athletes and administrators and became enthralled by the Olympic Games at age 12 due to their combination of sport, pageantry, and their international scope. So 10 years later, after moving to Los Angeles and coming out, I saw a poster announcing the first gay Olympic Games, as the gay games were initially named. And I knew at that moment that my calling had found me, because not only did it include the sport and the pageantry and the internationalism, but it allowed me to be my true self. So I founded Team Los Angeles that competed at the first gay games in 1982 and have spent a majority of the past 41 years directly involved with providing sports opportunities for the LGBTIQA and the HIV/AIDS communities. And in 2015, I attended the Compete Sports Awards banquet here in Los Angeles. At the time, I was a board member with the Federation of Gay Games, the organization that oversees the quadrennial gay games. And by chance, I ended up being seated next to you, Tracy, and we had never met before.
But I had heard your name when I was working on the West Hollywood Sports Festival 2 months earlier. We just never met during the event.
No.
I was the director of communications for the first ever West WeHo Sports Festival and was at the banquet to accept the 2015 Compete Sports Diversity Award for Outstanding National Tournament.
It's interesting because from that first night, I know it sounds cliche, but you had me at hello because I knew I wanted to work with you. You were always such a positive person, and you just, your perspective on things just really, it opened my eyes in certain ways. So when I decided to create a day to focus on diversity and inclusion in sport, I immediately reached out to you. And before we knew it, we had established the basis for our initiative. So, Tracy, how about filling in our listeners on exactly what is Diversity in Sport Day?
Sure. Okay. Diversity in Sport Day is an annual event held every August 28th, whose motto is Celebrate, Motivate, Advocate. We celebrate the trailblazers, triumphs, and milestones in sport as a way to motivate others to set new standards of inclusion and advocate for universal equity in sport and society at large.
Diversity in Sport Day was launched in 2022 to commemorate the 40th anniversary of the opening day for Gay Games 1 on August 28, 1982 in San Francisco. Last year, the West Hollywood City Council declared August 28th as Diversity in Sport Day, with Mayor Seppi Shine presenting the proclamation at an event at High Tops Bar and Grill in West Hollywood, which was attended by more than 100 local athletes and sports administrators.
And next year, August 28th, will be the opening day for the Paris 2024 Paralympic Games. So with an eye to the past and a focus on the future, Diversity in Sport Day is a day to celebrate all athletes and athletics, whether that's at events such as the Invictus Games, Senior Games, Paralympics, Special Olympics, Gay Games, as well as athletes breaking barriers at all levels of competition, be it local grassroots athletes in activities or elite athletes participating at the highest levels of international and professional competition. Diversity in Sport Day is a day for everyone.
And speaking of those competing at the highest level, you just returned from Aotearoa, New Zealand, where you were on assignment at the Women's World Cup. How was that experience?
It was awesome. It was my first World Cup, and I had a few freelance assignments. I got to interview a player on the Haitian national team, and I was also part of the Starting 11 Women Behind the World Cup project that an organization called Women in Soccer produced. And the experience in Auckland was also very inclusive in terms of sports, as we saw all communities acknowledged. We witnessed history as sport was used as a gesture of acknowledgement of First Nation populations. To honor the Maori, who are the first people of the country, organizers raised the red and black Maori flag above the city's Eden Park Stadium before all of the matches, and performers sang the country's national anthem in Te Reo, the Maori language. Talk about being present to diversity in sport. It was a beautiful sight to see.
Oh, I can imagine. What an experience. And, I know from my own travels to New Zealand, a part of you will always stay connected to Aotearoa, the land of the long white cloud, as New Zealand is known to the Maori. Welcome back. We are pleased to have with us as our first featured guest on Matters of Inclusion, Miss Candace Cable. Hey, Candace.
Hi, Shamie. Hi, Tracy.
How are you doing this morning?
I'm really, I'm doing okay. Each day is another day kind of thing. And for the folks that, because I know this podcast are not seeing us, I am a white woman who has kind of chin length, silver blonde hair. I wear black rimmed glasses and I use a wheelchair for mobility.
Thank you for educating our viewers to that, so it gives them an idea. So Tracy, shall we begin?
Sure. Okay, but before we get started, I did want to give a little background on you, Candace. She is the first woman to medal in both the Summer and Winter Paralympic Games and was the first American woman to win a cross-country skiing overall World Cup title. Candace is also a 6-time winner of the Boston Marathon and winner of the first 4 Los Angeles marathons in the women's wheelchair division. She is also a United States Olympic Paralympic Committee Hall of Fame inductee. Candace uses the analogy that she summited all 14 of the 8,000-meter mountains in Paralympic sport. It gives me great pleasure to welcome to the Matters of Inclusion podcast, World and Paralympic champion, Candace Cable.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you so much for that really kind introduction. And I hope people get that little analogy that I created, because those 8,000-meter peaks, right? There's 14 in the world, and they are at such a height that most people who summit them have to use supplemental oxygen. They're just that tall. And I feel like my 27-year of my Paralympic career feels like I dabbled in a lot of different places. And I feel like I've done just about everything you could possibly do. And it was part of the reason why I decided to move on from my athletic career into the work I do now with more advocacy and getting to the space of creating more advocates in our disability spaces.
That sounds awesome. So speaking of your career, can you take us back to the beginning? How did your journey to become a world and Paralympic champion begin?
Well, I suppose everything begins like I was born. I was born in Glendale, California. Yeah, and I was a non-disabled kid. I I didn't start using a wheelchair for mobility until after an accident later in life. And growing up in Southern California, grew up in the San Gabriel Valley in a city called West Covina in the 50s. I was born in 1954. And I mean, I always felt like I had every opportunity that I ever wanted to explore. And I was always a super curious kid, but I was not an athlete. That was not something that was interesting to me at all because I avoided conflict like the plague. And to be an athlete, I think, what I've learned from my experience as an athlete is have to get really comfortable with conflict and to be able to push through those pieces of it that do feel uncomfortable to get to that next level, whatever it might be. And so growing up, when we had PE and we were required to play the sports at school, I resisted a lot. I was much better spectator and cheerleader for everything else. And so I participated as much as we were required to. But what I really loved was spending time outdoors, playing with my friends, running around, building forts and climbing trees and riding my bicycle or going down to the beach and surfing and hiking in the wilderness. As a family, we had our proverbial 2-week vacation every year, and my dad would take us camping somewhere up and down the California coast, Oregon coast, and the Washington area. And so I really enjoyed the outdoors a lot. And when I had my spinal cord injury at the age of 21 from a car accident, and I woke up being told that I had paralyzed my legs from the back injury and that I would never walk again and I would use a wheelchair. I didn't have a good knowledge either of how the body worked. And I thought, broken back, broken arm, broken leg, put a cast on it. Should be good in 6 weeks. I got a life. I need to get back to that. I'm not going to do this. And I checked out. I just checked out. I was like, well, I'm going to just wake up one of these days and this is going to be gone. And I went through 6 months of rehabilitation in the hospital. And so I was pretty institutionalized by the end of that, really incredibly frightened about moving out into a world in 1975 that wasn't built for people who used any kind of mobility device, because we didn't get the Rehabilitation Act 504 actually signed and it implemented until 1977. It was written in 1973, but they didn't really put in the ways to implement it until 77, after a large group of disabled individuals took over the federal building in San Francisco for the longest takeover of a federal building ever in this country to this day, to get those implementations put into place and get that Rehabilitation Act, which basically said that if any program or buildings or institutions were federally funded, they needed to be accessible for people with disabilities, which really, focused on a big piece on schools and also employment. But we really didn't see real traction begin to happen until the Americans with Disabilities Act was written and signed in 1990. So disabled people didn't get their civil rights until then. So for me, after my spinal cord injury in 1975 was in the middle of that Rehabilitation Act piece, I had checked out. I was like, this is going to go away. I'm not coming back until, and I really just isolated myself and did drugs, and woke up one day and said, I don't want to do this anymore with my life. Went to a rehabilitation institute, spent time there. And while I was there, I was sent over to the other side of the road to where they had the spinal cord injury rehabilitation unit that I had been in. And I started to play some sports with people who use wheelchairs. They were inventing wheelchair tennis. There was wheelchair basketball, of course. And I started playing these sports with them because, one, the folks that were working with me in a psychological space to give me new skills really wanted me to also have some activity, like the non-disabled counterparts that were in the hospital with me were getting, but I wasn't a part of. And I realized for me to really heal and move forward, I needed to find community, and that I needed to be with my people. And so that, I would say, was kind of the start, was that I really wanted to hang out with these people, and they were doing sports.
Awesome. You know, so then leading into your actual competitions, your first Paralympic Games was in 1980 in Arnhem, in the Netherlands. Is that correct?
Yes. Our games were held in Arnhem, Holland, because in 1980, there were some movements already to have the Paralympic Games in the same cities and venues and same country as the Olympic Games following them. And it, like 1960 in Rome, they did it. 1964, they did it in Tokyo. Well, the Soviets, because it was supposed to be in Moscow in 1980, the Soviets said they didn't have any disabled people. So they weren't going to hold the Paralympic Games. So Arnhem, Holland, stepped up and held the Paralympic Games in 1980 there. And that was my first Paralympic Games.
And you only started training 4 months before?
Well, I think that there's a little piece left out of that wherever that information came from, is 4 months before I had gotten in a racing chair for the first time, which was really not much different from my everyday chair that I was using at the time, because we didn't have the lightweight wheelchairs we use now. There was more the 50-pound stainless steel Everson Jennings wheelchair that folks were starting to cut down. They were taking the side plates off. They were pulling the handles off. They were cutting the foot plates off and creating one solid foot plate. I had started 2 years earlier to attend Long Beach State. You know, I got out of the drug rehabilitation hospital, met some of my people. And once I was at Long Beach State going to school, I found Disabled Students Union, and there were more people with disabilities, and they were doing sports. And one of the places where I gravitated to first was swimming. I thought, well, and I was still very uncomfortable being seen using a wheelchair. People would stare at me. I wasn't comfortable with it. So I thought, oh, if I get in the water and swim, no one will even know I have a disability. And I signed up for what I thought was a swimming class, which actually turned out to be the swim team.
Oh,
And the coach of the swim team, when I showed up on the pool deck, looked at me and he said, well, this is the swim team. And that coach was John Urbanchek. And John Urbanchek went on from being the coach at Long Beach State to be a premier coach in Olympic history, swimming. But he saw me and I said, well, I thought the swimming class. And he goes, you know, you can join us if you want, and I'll teach you how to swim, and I'll teach you how to swim competitively. And I said, okay. And I thought, well, if I'm swimming competitively, I can still hang out with my buddies over here that have disabilities that are doing sports. I'm not doing the same sports, but I can hang out with them. And so I swam on that swim team for 2 seasons, and he set me up in all the local swim team races that were with the university. So I didn't really travel with them, but when it was in the area, he set it up so that if they were swimming 100 meters, I was swimming 50 in my own lane. And I would go to the shaving parties and do that with the swimmers, and I was all part of that. So when I was going to a regional meet, I had become a part of a group called the Southern California Flyers. It was a little team we put together of disabled folk that were doing different sports. And my sport was swimming. And I was at a regional meet in San Jose, I believe it was. And I was swimming in a couple of races, hoping to qualify for nationals in 1980. And a coach, Barbara Chambers, she was coaching a variety of different athletes, but mostly wheelchair racing athletes, said, "Hey, I think you might be good at wheelchair racing. Let's go see." And we went out to the track. She borrowed one of the chairs that she had from one of the other athletes. And she said, "Okay, I want you to warm up, push around the track, and then I'm going to time you going around the track once, one loop, as fast as you can." And I did. And she said, "You're only a few seconds off the national record.
Wow.
I think this is a good sport for you." So I went to nationals in Illinois that year in 1980. I competed in swimming as well as on the track, and I made the team as a wheelchair racer on the track.
What an incredible story that is.
I know. So that's the 4 months there.
Wow. Wow. But
So I already had that fitness, right?
yeah,
I already
how
had the-
exhilarating.
Yes, it was. And I actually was quite disappointed I didn't get to do both when we were in Arnhem, because I really did want to swim. I had spent those 2 seasons really working hard and learning those strokes. And I mean, from the first time when I got in the pool to almost drowning,
Uh,
because the cold water made me gasp for air, to actually being able to compete at a high level was incredibly exhilarating for me. And yeah, but the wheelchair racing definitely was something I was more of a natural at.
You have had a very long career, but if you just had to maybe drill it down to 1 or 2 highlights of your career that maybe you'll always treasure, moments you'll always treasure, what would those be?
So thank you for that question, Tracy. I really appreciate it, because you're right. I've had so many different highlights and so many opportunities to grow and learn and fail and come back. But I think that a real standout for me is in 1984, the Olympic Games were in Los Angeles, and they had the opportunity to hold the Paralympic Games too, but they declined that because they weren't required to. I mean, currently there's a contract. If you bid for the Olympic Games, you must put on the Paralympic Games too. Like, you can't not do it anymore. The International Olympic Committee and the International Paralympic Committee have a contract now for that. But back then in 84, we didn't have it. And so they declined to do that. But the president of the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, Juan Antonio Samaranch, was a huge champion of adapted sport for disabled people in Spain, and he wanted something. And what they came up with were 2 events that were going to be held as exhibition events during the Olympic Games. So they were on the calendar and they were in the agenda, and they were going to be wheelchair racing. One was an 800 meters for women, and the other was a 1500 meters for men. And this would be the very first time we as athletes with disabilities were going to be seen on a global stage, and it was broadcast all over the world. And they also, the broadcast company at the time, did these up close and personals of different athletes and things. And I was the one they chose for the up close and personal for the wheelchair events. And I was absolutely convinced that I'm gonna take this thing and run with it. And we had to qualify way before the games. And that was a final that we had in the games. It was a final that was held during the track and field competitions. And coming into that stadium that was filled with 80,000 people, and knowing that we were going to change the bias and stigma that surrounded disability by people watching us go around that track, for women, 2 times, 800 meters, and for men, 3.5 times in a 1,500 meters, was a moment in time that we knew was a paradigm shift for not just our sport, but for the image of what disability is and isn't. Disability is a human life experience we're all going to have. Should we be gifted to live long enough in our lives, we will have age-related disabilities. So this is a club everybody's going to be a part of, no matter what. And to be able to show that those ideas that people had in the past about your life being over, disability being a bad thing, never being able to do anything in your life, have a family, be someone who had employment, all those things were out the door if you had a disability, was not true. And we were able to shatter those images. And so it was a real buzz. It was massive. My entire family was in the stands, and we lined up and they introduced us. And when the gun went off, honestly, I can't tell you how I got around that track twice. I totally blanked out. I just and I watch myself in videos and I see myself pushing, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm so robotic. It's so fun. And I crossed the line in third. I was absolutely devastated that I hadn't won the gold medal. And I remember afterwards, my whole family being super excited, and they were jumping around me when we finally left the stadium. I was like, oh my God, so awesome. I'm like, I didn't win the gold medal. And my father said something to me. He said, honey, there were 8 women in that event. 3 women won medals. You're one of them. You have a choice here. You have a choice. You can choose this to be a failure, or you can choose it to be a victory. It's totally up to you. And I have to say that that's a piece that stands out for me in multiple ways, because I know it changed the way people saw folks with disabilities and changed our trajectory, but it also changed me in understanding how I can look at something and determine what I think it is. So thank you for that question.
So circling back to our motto of celebrate, motivate, and advocate, was there a specific event that you can recall that motivated you to become an athlete?
The instance really for me to become an athlete was to be a part of a community. That really was the thing that was motivational to me, because I didn't have any background in sports or athletic sports competition previous to my spinal cord injury at the age of 21. And I did feel very isolated and alone. And I began to interact with other people with disabilities, and I felt that I had found this community that I wanted to be a part of, and they were participating in sports. So I thought, well, I guess I better give this thing a try. And, as you heard, I started with swimming, but I did try wheelchair basketball. I played on a women's wheelchair basketball team for a short period of time. We were the unicorns. So
Okay.
I'm officially in a unicorn. And I didn't like it. I did not like people running into me. I want my space. And wheelchair tennis was being invented, and I tried that, but I didn't really like chasing the ball around kind of thing. It just didn't. And we didn't have really sharp wheelchairs they have now that have wheels that are canted like this, that
Yes.
turn on a dime. I mean,
Yes.
you have to wear a seatbelt in those chairs because you'll be flying out.
Yeah.
Just and wheelchair racing just wow, the thing that besides that, I was told by Barbara Chambers, I don't think you could be really good at this, which is always great for anybody's ego. I could be good at this, a sense of accomplishment, was that there was wheelchair racing on the road in 10Ks, 5Ks, marathons that was just beginning. And that really appealed to me because we would be on the same start line. We would go through the entire same course and cross the same finish line. And for me, that was a feeling of being back included in the world again, as I was before as a non-disabled person. I had access to everything as a non-disabled person. I had the environmental privilege, never had to think about how I was going to get somewhere or even if I could get in. And that wheelchair racing, I think, was probably the biggest spark for me, because I realized that with that, we could also start to change the mindset of the non-disabled runners about who the wheelchair racers are.
I know one topic that's really important to you is the one of ableism. We all need to have greater awareness, not just on the individual level, but on the public consciousness. So let's start first. How would you define ableism?
All of the discriminations and the oppressions that exist in the world, racism, sexism, ableism, they diminish us in such a huge way because we get stuck in believing that there are people or things that are more valuable than other people and things. And what I really love about what Talila Lewis, or also known as TL, wrote, ableism, a system of assigning value to people's bodies and minds based on a societal construct, ideas of normalcy, productivity, desirability, intelligence, excellence, and fitness. These constructed ideas are deeply rooted in eugenics, anti-Blackness, misogyny, colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism. This systemic oppression leads to people and a society determining people's value based on their culture, age, language, appearance, religion, birth, or living place, health and wellness, and or their ability to satisfactorily reproduce, excel, and behave. You do not have to have a disability to experience ableism. I find that just one of the most profound and beautiful definitions I've ever heard about, oppression on humanity. And oftentimes ableism is confused with just an overlay on top of disability. But if we really look at this definition, we know that it's not. It's not just about disability. It really is about value. What kind of value is being placed? And value should never, it should not, it's like everybody has equal value. Everybody should be given the same equitable opportunities as everyone else. And then they get to choose, right? They get to choose what they want to do, because so many of us in this world have not had the choices. We've just been pushed into certain directions. And in doing that, we never really even ever realize our own power, our own internal power. And internalized ableism, the ableism we all deal with inside ourselves all the time, is very insidious because it feels like we're overcoming something. We're getting over it. And athletes are the worst. We are the worst for internalized ableism. And so checking ourselves, being very conscious of how we operate, an example too of internalized ableism is, for me would be that I am going to go to, say I'm going to go to a concert, and I want to make sure that it's accessible. I believe, and this is my internalized ableism, that it's my responsibility to figure that out. And the truth is that the venue should already have done that, that should already exist. And so my internalized ableism is that, well, if it's not there, it's probably my fault. And I need to do everything I possibly can to make sure it is. And it was built that way, and we have to dismantle it. We got to dismantle it. And so we have to be diligent. We have to be persistent. We have to be determined in whatever way works for us. And we have to care for ourselves and be gentle on ourselves also, and give ourselves grace when we do get it wrong and we don't get it right, because we can't get it right every time. And it's really important to honor that with self-care, but also to do it with grace for ourselves and for other people. When people are contributing to society, there are massive number of ways to do it, right? Everybody's got a light that shines, and to be able to have the freedom to bring that forward in the way that it needs to be brought forward is really, I think, what we're all searching for. And I see it constantly in sports. And I'm really grateful to be here with both of you today. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes forward in this podcast that you two are starting. And I wish you absolutely the best with it. It's going to be amazing.
Thanks.
Thank you. You have certainly given us a lot of things to think about. This was a really fascinating conversation. So we want to once again thank our guest, World and Paralympic champion Candace Cable, for celebrating Diversity in Sport Day with us and challenging us to be more mindful of inclusion.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Yeah, and happy Diversity in Sport Day.
Yeah, happy Diversity in Sport Day.
To hear the complete interview with Candace Cable, please check out the link in the description below. So, looking ahead in the coming months, September is Deaf Awareness Month. Last year, the UK's BT Sport Network showed its support for inclusion during Deaf Awareness Month by launching the new initiative, Sign Up. This program helps to raise the profile of the deaf community within sport and to help make BT's programming accessible to all. They even teamed up with Premier League football players and managers to create videos to promote learning the British Sign Language. And September 21st is International Peace Day and Miniature Golf Day.
And looking ahead to October, it is Filipino American History Month. In the audio documentary Between Two Worlds, sports content creator and first-generation Filipino American Megan Reyes tells her story of the Filipino American experience in parallel with the Philippines women's national team's journey to their first ever FIFA Women's World Cup. It connects threads of identity, history, achievement, and hope through the lens of sport. You can listen to all the episodes on Apple Podcasts.
October is also Down Syndrome Awareness Month, which was first commemorated in the 1980s. The Special Olympics, which started in 1968, is the world's largest sports organization for individuals with intellectual disabilities, including Down syndrome. It provides year-round training and activities to 5 million participants around the world. More than 6,500 athletes, 9,000 family members, and 18,000 volunteers were part of the Special Olympics World Games in Berlin this past June. And for more information, go to specialolympics.org.
Okay, some of the sports events happening in the next year include the Invictus Games, which are September 9th through 16th in Dusseldorf. The first time the games will be held in Germany. And then the Pan Am Games will be from Friday, October 20th to Sunday, November 5th in Santiago, Chile, which I'm hoping
You're
to
hoping
attend.
to attend?
I'm hoping to attend, yes.
All right. And Gay Games 11 will be doing something quite unique this time out. For the first time in its 41-year history, the quadrennial Gay Games will take place in 2 locations at the same time. Following a 1-year delay due to COVID restrictions, Gay Games 11 will take place from November 3rd to 11th in Hong Kong, as well as in Guadalajara, Mexico. It will be the first time the games are in either Asia or Latin America. And Tracy, I have to tell you, after a 20-year absence, I will once again serve as general manager for Team Los Angeles West Hollywood, something I did 40 years ago and 20 years ago. So I'm also looking forward to competing in swimming this time.
And looking further ahead, the big destination for next year is Paris, France, which is hosting the Summer Olympic and Paralympic Games. Both can't miss events, so I won't miss them. I plan to be there. I've already got tickets to several events and plan to work as well.
That's right. And although I won't be getting to Paris until the second week of the Olympics, I'm excited because you and I were able to secure 4 tickets to the men's water polo finals on August 11, a sport I played for 10 years in masters competition. But then you and I will be back in Paris to host a Diversity in Sport Day event the morning of the Paris 2024 Paralympic Games opening ceremony on August 28th, 1 year from today.
Mark your calendars. It's going to be a very busy year. But now it's time for us to wrap up this first episode of Matters of Inclusion. We'd like to once again thank our guest, World and Paralympic Champion Candace Cable.
And a special shout out to Billy the Kid Dapier for providing today's music.
And make sure to follow us on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And share those hashtags. Hashtag Diversity in Sport Day. Hashtag Inclusion Matters. Hashtag DIS28. Hashtag Celebrate, Motivate, Advocate.
Thanks for tuning in to Matters of Inclusion. And Tracy, happy Diversity in Sport Day.
Happy Diversity in Sport Day to you too, Shamie, and everyone.